Hello. Welcome to the Rev and the Rav, a program of interreligious dialogue and discovery. I'm Reverend Nick Carter, and I'm joined by my friend
Rabbi Daniel Lehmann from Hebrew College.
Today we're going to explore some things that have been happening in the world around us. As a Jewish leader and a Christian Protestant leader, we're a bit intrigued about what's happening in Rome. And we've seen Pope Benedict do something quite remarkable. And Dandy, I wondered, as a Jewish leader, how do you take a look at what's happening in Rome and what the Pope has done?
Well, in many ways, I think the Pope's resignation was perhaps his boldest move of his papacy. And for me, it emphasizes the potential for humanizing religious leadership. The notion that you die in office, certainly as someone running an academic institution, tenure is always something that haunts me. So the notion that someone of supreme religious authority can actually become emeritus and take a step back and allow new leadership to emerge is, I think, a very compelling and important development for the Catholic Church. And I think Pope Benedict, for whatever reasons were involved in his decision, actually contributed something very, very positive to the Roman Catholic Church.
Now, I had a similar reaction. I was really quite taken by his decision to step down. And I want to tip my hat to Rome and to him for this action. You know, I really hope that there isn't a negative backstory. That if it's just simply age and his sense of responsibility, because I really do think that that's one of the things that folks miss is folks who are in a significant position of leadership, the burden of responsibility that you have, and his had to be enormous. To have 1 billion Catholics around the world, the need for folks who demand to have access and want to be inspired by him, that's got to be way heavy. And if your health is giving way, the call to step aside has got to ring loudly in your ears. But given the tradition of the papacy, this was an act of enormous humility, and I think actually strengthened the whole church by doing so.
Well, the precedent it sets, I think, is very, very significant in terms of the way future Roman Catholic leaders, and the Pope in particular, will think about the responsibility of passing on the mantle of leadership. Other people have commented that it's going to put pressure, potentially, on future popes, maybe to resign or retire early because of various issues at hand. But for me, it's fascinating to watch this combination of democracy on the one hand, because you have this College of Cardinals that's going to vote in a rather democratic process, and yet you're talking about 115 men, sitting together in the Sistine Chapel, deciding the leadership of this billion-plus member church, which, is a tension.
Yeah, well, we all have a bit of a puzzle how churches get organized and where authority sits within those churches and religious traditions. And in fact, it really is an important study, I think, for anybody who's interested in religion, is to ask the question, where does authority reside? Because in the Roman tradition, it is tradition itself. In the body of the office of the Pope, but it puts great emphasis on tradition, and there is a physics to that tradition that wants to keep going, and makes it harder for change. Now, it does make me want to ask you, Danny. So where's the Pope of the Jews?
Well, thankfully, we don't have a Pope. We don't even have a chief rabbi of the Jewish people writ large. There is this phenomenon of chief rabbis in certain countries, certainly in European countries. In Britain, for instance, there's a chief rabbi, but that person is really only the chief rabbi of a particular organization of Orthodox synagogues, so it doesn't really represent the Jewish community as a whole. In Israel, there's actually both an Ashkenazi and a Sephardic chief rabbi, which is recognized by the state, as is the case in certain European countries. But the stature of that chief rabbinate has really diminished significantly over the years. It used to be a position of real moral authority, and that is certainly not anymore the case for many people. And
Administrative authority?
yeah, I mean, there's a whole legal infrastructure to the rabbinate as recognized by the state in Israel, because they are in charge of marriage and divorce laws for Jews, kosher standards. There's a whole set of issues that they regulate. So there's a kind of regulation element to what they do. But the ceremonial function still exists, but the moral authority is really weakened considerably. In the United States and in many countries, there is no such thing. We have also a split in the denominations. And the irony is that the Reform movement within Judaism in the United States, which is the most liberal, both politically and religiously, also has in some ways the greatest structure to its rabbinate, so that there are...
Is there a top leadership position?
There is a top leadership position for the Reform movement and the conservative movement, but there are subdivisions within the movement of different organizational structures. So there's an organization of rabbis, there's an organization of congregations, each of which has a leader, and oftentimes, most of the time, those leaders will be rabbis. But policy decisions and questions of religious authority tend to be made and decided by committees and groups of rabbis, and then it's up to the individual congregational rabbi to follow.
So they don't have to follow?
In many cases, they don't have to.
Now, would that contrast with Orthodoxy?
Well, in many ways, Orthodoxy is actually more decentralized. There's less organizational coherence in Orthodoxy, so it's really... In the Hasidic world, there are different sects with different rabbis who have extreme authority. In other Orthodox circles, it's really the local congregational rabbi, because there aren't the same superstructures that exist. It's just not as developed an organizational infrastructure. And what's the case in the Protestant world?
Well, I think outside of Catholicism, in many ways, you're well served to just see a continuum of authority with perhaps the Orthodox Church and then perhaps the Episcopalian and Methodist, working your way down to congregational polity Baptists and perhaps Quakers and things that going to the extreme end, that what happens is that by the time you get down to where Baptists and Congregationalists, the United Church of Christ is, that you've almost taken the Catholic hierarchy and turned it on its head, where the local church is the seat of authority, or in some cases it's associations of local churches, that those associations, either the local church ordains or the association ordains, as opposed to then as you work your way up, that it becomes a national body that ordains, and also control over who hires a minister, who puts a minister in place. In some cases, the judicatory itself puts a minister in place. Now, almost all of them have a national office.
Right.
And a national leader of different titles. And in some cases, there are bishops named as bishops. By the time you get down to some of those that have a more congregational polity, those formal terms, like bishop, disappear. And what you'll get are things like association leaders or conference ministers or things like that. That's much more an administrative post. But certainly what disappears too is the ability of the national body to offer policy that local congregations will have to follow.
And so where do you get the development, for instance, of common books of prayer? How do those emerge organizationally?
Well, in some of the higher ecclesial churches, they are developed by the national bodies and adopted by the national bodies. In some cases, you'll find some of these things like hymnals and books of prayer that are authorized by the national body, but local congregations are free to ignore them. And that's where there's also a sense in which in some of the higher ecclesial churches, when you go to one church, you experience worship and a set of materials. Then you go across the country, you'll find the same materials and the same worship service. For instance, a Baptist church, you could go down the block to another Baptist church and find different materials and a whole different approach to worship.
It's fascinating. Well, it's going to be really interesting to see how this unfolds in Rome over the next several weeks, and whether in fact there'll be a new pope that will take the church in a different direction. But it is sort of strange for us, I think, to watch this process unfold, given the fact that we have nothing similar to it because our authority structures are so much more decentralized.
Well, in a larger religious family, we certainly are excited for them. We're anxious for them because it really is a defining moment. I think the Pope's resignation will lead to decades of reflection on that office, and as you suggest, for other popes. But this next pope could have a very significant impact on the life of the faithful within the Roman tradition. So we'll have to watch that for fun.
We will.
Well, Danny, thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us for this session of the Rev and the Rav. Until we meet again, I'm Danny Lehmann. Shalom.
And I'm Nick Carter. Peace.